Awesome. Welcome back to the show. I am so passionate about today's episode. I have my guests, Rick Reynolds and Theresa Byrne, with me, and we are going to be talking about creating and maintaining unbreakable boundaries. Rick and
Mm.
Theresa, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Pleasure
Thanks
to
Now,
for
be
having us.
before we jump in, I'm going to give a little backstory because Rick and I go way back. My spiritual awakening, I call it, started in 2012. And I went to Sedona, Arizona, and I went on a soul adventure. And Rick was my angel guide. So he's the one that helped me craft seeing over 11 practitioners in 5 days. And the way that I describe it is I just wooed the fuck out of myself. It was the first time I had done anything like that, but it really transitions things. And so, Rick, you and I have reconnected recently. You have a special
Yeah.
place in my heart. So I'm going to start with you, even though I like to go ladies first. But I want to start with Rick and just have you share a little bit about your background and how you actually, too, came to do this work that you're doing.
Yeah. Well, I was in TV news for 20 years, a reporter, producer, ran the whole television newsroom in Sacramento, and was vacationing in Sedona and doing some incredible breath work when I got a message from my soul that I was making my life too hard and it was time to do something different. And I went home and resigned and left that career. And then a year and a half later went, oh no, what have I done? my my parents were wonderful. I went and talked to them and they were like, do you really think that your ego is more powerful than your soul? That you could override your soul's purpose and actually get it wrong? I went,
Wow.
not, right? And they said, just enjoy what you're doing now and the right thing will come along. And I reconnected with a passion for hypnosis. When I was a kid, I was hypnotizing people like in junior high school and past life regressions, and all sorts of fun, crazy things, and reconnected with all that. And went through a 200-hour, really sophisticated training to become a certified clinical hypnotherapist, and then added life coaching to the mix and energy therapy, Reiki, emotional freedom techniques, and built a private practice in California. And then in 2011, up and moved to Sedona and teamed up with Sedona Soul Adventures. And here I am.
So yeah, you're just a little bit legit. And I love the wisdom that your parents gave you too. Thank you for that introduction. And
Mm.
now I want to talk about your partner in crime, Theresa Byrne, who you've teamed up with to do a 4-week course called The Love Solution. And this is where we're going to bring in those boundaries. Theresa, welcome to the show.
Thank you. What do you want to know? What can I tell you?
Oh my
What do you
gosh,
want to know?
everything. Like, how did you? Okay, so talk a little bit about the love solution and where this like came from. And then I want to get into the boundaries conversation, but I would love to know a little bit about your background and how you came to do the self-development work.
I started doing self-development work a long, long time ago. I think I picked up my first book at 13. I was like, I want to learn more about how people function and what their brains do and how they work and how they don't work. And when I went through college, I studied psych and social work, ran a crisis hotline, and decided there was no way I could ever be a therapist. My heart goes out to every therapist in the world, but it was just not for me. So I did something different and I became a martial arts school owner and founder. And for the half of a semester of quarter that we studied boundaries and social work, boundaries were everything in martial arts because when you're partnered with somebody, you have to say, hey, can you go a little slower? Or let's do it this way, or go ahead and do that. There has to be an ongoing conversation. There's a negotiation. And I was like, boom. Plus,
Wow.
when I teach self-defense, what is the one thing that you would, any person would need to defend themselves against a predator or somebody who was trying to cause them harm? a boundary. And there's so many
Mm-hmm.
kinds of boundaries, but we in social work, we're trained, there was one, right? No, that's it. No, there's so many more boundaries. There's all the yeses before you get to that no. There's all the things that are in here before you get there. So the love solution was created. Rick and I run programs together for helping people change their brain called positive intelligence. And we have had people over and over ask us, can you do boundaries and relationships? You guys are both experts at these things. Help us in this way. And we said, yes, because that's what you do. Somebody knocks on your door.
I love it. So you're both obviously like, you've both shared that you've been having these passions since a very young age, right? And I think you nailed it, Rick, with, the soul's calling. I mean, that's why we're here today, sharing our insights, our gifts. But Theresa, I so relate with that curiosity about how the brain works. It fascinates me how dynamic we are as human beings, but I'm especially passionate about this topic because it's almost like for me everything starts with healthy boundaries, right? And the first thing that I want to talk about is, what's the difference between a boundary and then giving someone what would be considered like a controlling ultimatum? Because I won't reference the famous actor that got into trouble for what he thought was a boundary that was actually controlling behavior. But if you could just clarify that for us, some people listening know exactly who I'm talking about. But if you could just share a little bit more about, like, what are the fundamentals of a boundary?
Do you want me to do that or Rick? It's entirely up to
Either
you.
one. Yes, and.
Boundaries are bridges. Boundaries create connection. They are not walls. They are not ultimatums. An ultimatum is a shutdown. It's a shut off. That is not a boundary. A boundary is a discussion. It's a conversation. It's between somebody that we care about, most likely, or someone that has in some way, shape, or form upset us. And we're asking for something different. And I'm going to give you my little rap song. And it's really weird. And just stick with me. I'm not a good rapper. A boundary. Oh, what you will and what you won't, what you do and what you don't. So it's not just your no, it's what you do want. It is what
that.
you do like. And it's also what you don't. But it's that bridge. Not an ultimatum is a cutoff. It's a wall. It's a cutoff. A true boundary is a bridge until a hard boundary is needed. So different kinds of boundaries. What would you say about that?
I think we set boundaries with love, which is why we're calling this the love solution, because love is the answer to everything. When you set boundaries with fear, you end up with ultimatums, right? And I think a lot of people don't set boundaries in the beginning. They learn to set them, and that learning process, it comes out as anger. And this is my boundary. And it's like, or we really kind of flip that and take a loving approach to setting boundaries, because boundaries help both you and the other person. It's a loving experience for both.
Now, I think you're both speaking about in a healthy dynamic, right? Because I have a little bit of experience being in a trauma bond, like,
Well,
full disclosure.
so let's talk about that.
Yes.
In toxicity, you need a strong boundary, and the best boundary is not to be there. The best boundary is to cut something off, but that is for your safety, your sanity. And so that is also a boundary. But when you're having it as a conversation, it's a choice. It's a bridge. It's more of what Rick and I are talking about.
Yeah.
But if you're not healthy, all the walls.
Yeah, and I think, it's interesting too, is like, even just this idea of, I'm sure some people are listening going, what are my boundaries? Even if they've been in a healthy relationship or they've been in a toxic relationship, they may not be aware of what they are. They just feel this, like, this resentment, right? And this ignored sense in themselves that then turns into that angry, like, reaction in a relationship of, Like just blurting out, you can't do that to me, versus, let me check in, let me see what's going on here, and let me create this bridge. So talk a little bit more about how you facilitate people getting to this idea of these bridges, which I love, by the way.
Rick, I'll send that to you first and then I'll answer.
Yeah. So, it really involves, especially if you've got people in a loving relationship, okay, that where they're with their quote beloved, then it's, if this person is my beloved, they're never intentionally going to hurt me unless they are hurt. So having that understanding just from the very beginning. I just before we got on this, I'm working with a couple today where they've got a total miscommunication that blew up their relationship. They're they had a block party in their neighborhood. And he went off to talk to all the guys and he's drinking a little bit. And she's like, I'm really tired. I'm going up to bed. What that meant was, come join me and we can snuggle and just have our own time. But he thought it meant she's exhausted. She wants to go to bed. So he stayed out and drank and had a good time socializing till after midnight and came up and crawled into bed and fell asleep. And she woke up the next morning hurt and didn't say a word, and the next day hurt and didn't say a word. And during that silence, the issues began, because the story began in his mind. Oh, she's upset with me. I'm not even allowed to go talk to my friends. I can't socialize. So he started his whole argument back and goes to her, okay, finally, what's the matter? And she goes, well, I'm hurt. So she's trying to talk in her terms of feelings, and feelings aren't right or wrong. And he says, you're angry at me because I went off with my friends. This is so unfair, blah, 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 and got instantly defensive. And the
So
key
did she feel like there was a boundary that she had set with him that was broken?
yeah, well, she wasn't clear on her boundary. Her boundary was, if I head up to bed, you come follow within a half hour. That was her expectation. And that could be an appropriate boundary to have set before the evening began. I know you're going to want to be with your friends, but I want some of your time and attention at the end of the night, asking for what she wants. And then if he didn't do that, there's he violated a boundary. Does that make sense?
It does, but the way that I'm interpreting it is like, this is how we need to communicate our desires and be able to give our partner the opportunity to say, yeah, I can meet that, or possibly I can't. I don't know.
Right.
Teresa, I see you nodding your head. What are your thoughts?
I love what's called a preemptive boundary. So before you go to this party, you're like, hey, this is my signal. I'm going to, that I'm done, or that, I need out of this conversation or whatever. And then we will. That's an agreement. It's easy, right? And then he can follow or not follow. To me, when you set a boundary, you got to know what your choices are. You got to know what your wants and your needs are. And I'm not going to denigrate this woman, but she wasn't clear in asking. And men oftentimes need clarity, like ask for this, their brains like targets. And this thing, can you do that? Great, perfect. And then he knows what he's doing or not doing. The difference is when you have what we call fuzzy boundaries or soft boundaries, no one knows. Was that a boundary, or was that like, was she asking, or was she just saying what she wanted? Like, there's so much confusion. A boundary offers an opportunity for clarity. Hey, I'm going to go to bed. I'll see you in a half an hour. That would have been a great boundary.
Right?
So
Yeah.
how are those boundaries and not like desires?
What if a boundary is a desire? Let me put it to you this way. When I teach self-defense, I teach people how to do a self-defense stance, and they say no to somebody coming to them, right? Well, this is what matters. This is what matters. It's what's behind the hands. It's the, what do I want? What are my choices? What are my desires? The first thing I always ask anybody who's working on boundaries, what's your operating manual? How do you thrive? Then you know what to ask for.
And then is there an agreement, right?
Then
Then
you can
there's
ask
an
for an
agreement.
agreement.
And then if the agreement is broken,
Then
then
you have
it's,
another discussion.
yep.
Yes. But oftentimes, and women, I work with women clients and they're like, oh my God, I can't believe he's still bothering me. And I'm like, did you tell him not to bother you? Did you tell him you weren't interested? Well, no, he's just a stalker. No, you need to be
Right.
clear and say, this isn't for me.
Right. I mean, you nailed it there, is we have to be clear about what is
Clarity.
working for us and what isn't working for us. And I was sharing with you both, for anyone who's listened to the cricket chirp I put out there, I struggled to create healthy boundaries in a very toxic relationship I was in. Well, actually, I didn't struggle to create the boundary. I didn't struggle to communicate the boundary. I struggled to maintain the boundary,
Follow up.
which is exiting the relationship. Hey, this has happened again. This doesn't work for me. I need to remove myself. And I want to talk about this component because I think it's really powerful. This idea of when we become blended with our inner children, because the adult version of us can go, yeah, that's the boundary. This doesn't work for me. This doesn't support my peace. It doesn't support my soul's work, whatever. And so I'm going to remove myself, versus the inner child comes in and goes, wait, I'm going to start driving the bus here. So let's talk about like some of these patterns that prevent us from creating healthy boundaries.
I like to have a framework because if my inner child is left to her own devices, she's usually a teenager, by the way. She's going to do her own thing. So I have a framework. We have a 3-strike rule. So somebody crosses our boundaries 3 times. First time, okay, might have been an accident. Yeah, there you go. Second time, okay, this is really interesting and I need to keep notice. Third time, what they want is more important than what I'm asking for. So anytime you set a boundary, like, hey, I don't do this, or I don't want that, or I don't choose that, and someone crosses it, what they're saying is what I want is more important than what you want. And that across the board. You're on the phone with a friend and you're like, I gotta go, I'm tired, and I've got to take, and they keep talking, they just crossed your boundary once. So I do a 3-strike rule. That way, my teenager and I are like, yeah, okay, I get that. All right, I can do 3 strikes. Okay. All right. And my adult is like, we're setting that framework. And it might not be 3 strikes for you. It might be something different. But when someone crosses your boundary, you got to notice it. And I don't recommend cutting them off like right away. And I've seen like dating coaches be like, burn the haystack and, get them out. How about you communicate and give them a couple of chances and then all bets are off. 3rd strike, man. But that's me. That's the framework I like to go with.
Yeah, and it really depends on the boundary, right? Like, what is there some gray area in those where you might, okay, let's give this a 4th shot, versus
Absolutely, but
oh no, that happens one time.
And if somebody hits me, that's one boundary, right? Like somebody is rude or mean and cutting, unkind, but you got to have your whatever works for you. And with that framework, if I have a 3-boundary framework, a 3-strike framework, I've got something to work off of. Otherwise, it's all like, I don't know what to do when things happen. But have a framework.
Yeah, I love that. Rick, any thoughts on that?
Brilliant. I think it's brilliant. I'm taking notes.
So I do want to ask, like, Rick, we'll start with you. What are some of the boundaries that you enter into relationship with? What are some of those things that are critical for you?
Oh my God, there are deal breakers, right? For me, abuse. I will not be in a relationship with abuse. I like to say that my love is unconditional, but my relationships have conditions. So, I'll love you. You'll have a special place in my heart forever. But if you want to be in relationship with me, you can't abuse me physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, in any way, shape, or form. I don't tolerate abuse. That's a red line. So that's a boundary.
I
No.
just want to call out this very important distinction that you just made, because I've heard people in relationship argue, you just don't love me unconditionally. And I think you nailed it. I can love you unconditionally, but my relationship has conditions. Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
just like send that one home, highlight it with a big yellow highlighter. And all the forms of abuse, right? Mental,
Right.
physical,
Right.
spiritual.
Right.
Thank
Yes.
you for sharing that.
Yeah. Those are red lines. Nobody crosses those. And
Yeah.
those are probably the clearest boundaries that I have in relationship.
And I think the other like kind of nuance to that is sometimes people don't know that manipulation, gaslighting, deflection, those are all like forms of abuse. So I think there's this like squishy, like gray area where people get really confused about what is abuse. So in your program, The Love Solution, do you get into any of those nuances of relationships to help people define what is and isn't okay and how to identify it and say, yeah, actually it's not as gray as you think, this is pretty black and white?
Oh, we're going to talk a lot about just that, and this idea that you can love somebody, but you can have a boundary and you can hold them accountable, and you don't have to continue a relationship that isn't loving. And at the same time, doing all that with empathy, understanding that there aren't just like gaslighters in the world for no reason. That someone who's doing the abuse has suffered from some sort of abuse in their own past. So we can have great empathy for them and still hold boundaries. We can have great love for them and still not want to be in a relationship with them. It's kind of like, people will complain about their partners versus coming to some form of acceptance about who they are and how they are. I keep seeing people wanting their partner to be something that they're incapable of being. Like,
Correct.
you know, yeah, I
Hmm.
compare it to going into the hardware store and ordering a ham sandwich. It's a store. Why don't they have ham sandwiches here, and being all upset? It's like, you've gotta.
And I talk about this a lot with my friends who are navigating exiting toxic relationships, is this idea
Mm.
of trying and trying again. And I did it too. My partner and we were both actively in therapy.
Mhm.
And you just keep trying and you keep trying. And it's so, Theresa, like my hope is, I haven't dived in deep into your program yet and your workshop, but do you offer a framework and permission to recognize when it's time to get out and how to get out?
Not only that, we offer people in the Love Solution a relationship plan. Like, here's how you function best in a relationship.
Mm.
Here are the things, here are the things that are going to drive you batty, right? Because here's your values and here's what's going to bother you a lot about someone. And if you are self-empowered and if you are assured, when someone ignores your boundaries, that's going to be like 10 times as hard for you. You get what I'm saying? Like,
I
it's hard for
do.
me
I
to
have
set a
chills
boundary.
right now. I'm like,
I'm
why
like,
didn't I do this before I got into the relationship?
Mhm.
yeah,
Let's first.
right. But, and the other thing I want to also acknowledge is squishy gray areas. Manipulation is motivation used in a harmful way. Every toddler is a manipulator. They will manipulate to get more ice cream, stay up later, not brush their teeth, do all of the things, right? But someone who is manipulating, they're just trying to get their way. And that's why boundaries are so important, because it's like, nope, that's not going to happen. You are going to bed at 9 o'clock or whatever bedtime is. Or no. But that's what I'm saying is someone who's manipulating, they will not. When you set a boundary, it's a lot harder to manipulate because you can see it. It's like you're lying in the sand. And then someone tries to manipulate over that. You realize they just said, oh, what I want is more important than what you want. And then you have another choice to make. But there are a ton of squishy areas. So we are going to help people with a relationship plan, like a customized, here's how you function best in relationships.
I love that. I love how we're like taking a step back and like, even before you build the boundary, let's get to know who you are and how you operate your best. And then I always say this too, and while we are wired as humans to be in relationship and in community, I'm often encouraging friends, and I've gone through this myself, how to release attachment to outcome when you are entering into a relationship and you are exploring, is this person right for me? Is like, I think we're so, we're still, it's getting better, but we're still programmed to be coupled up. Like that's the end goal, right? Is to get into a partnership. And instead, like really finding your grounding in yourself and self-love and self-worth and community and your own healing journey to be able to then do the work to understand how you best operate, create the healthy boundaries. Because I will tell you, dating for me now is so different than 4 years ago. I'm like, yeah, that's not going to work for me. Bye. Yep, you didn't honor my time, and I've communicated it. This is how my calendar works, and you don't get to keep fucking around with it. And then I'm out. So I'll let you just kind of like weigh in on this idea of self-love too, as part of the preparation in any healthy relationship.
But
Right.
the relationship with yourself is the longest one you'll have your entire life. And as I mentioned before, like a no is something you don't want, but everything else is here. What do I want? What helps me?
Right.
What gives me energy? What makes me feel good? What makes me come alive? Then you know that I have my calendar for a reason. It's not like you're just willy nilly out there going, you're out of here. Yeah, mess with my calendar. You have a calendar because it supports you. If I'm going on a date, I need a plan because I need to know what shoes to wear. I need a plan, and then my brain can relax. And I communicate that. But you got to know what you need and what you want before you can ask for it, before you can let someone else know.
And
Oh, I love that.
how you treat yourself is how others are going to treat you. If you love you, others will love you. If you like you, others will like you. But if you're beating yourself up, it's a cue for someone else to treat you poorly. So,
No doubt, no doubt. And I also think, and I would imagine, Rick, you could relate with this entirely, and Theresa, is when you come from that energy of self-love, from a spiritual perspective, what you, even before you start engaging with people, what you start to filter out and start to call in. It's been really interesting to see how the dynamics and the people that show up in my life have changed so much just energetically. Like you can't make it up what I'm seeing now versus what I saw then. And the little tests that come in.
Yes. And since I started studying and really diving deep into spirituality, I've had a couple of the most loving breakups you can ever imagine. And being able to end something with grace and acknowledgement and gratitude, like that is something that I wish everyone could learn, because it doesn't have to be, I'm attached to it being this way, I want it to be that way. There's a way to be compassionately detached. Like I am compassionate and I care about you, but we together are not, it's not working, but I want everything that you want for yourself. It's just not me. What if we had a world like that?
yeah.
That's a beautiful world to live in. And you and Rick are going to be starting to create that together with the Love Solution that's actually launching on November 10th. So just right around the corner. So just briefly share with us what people can expect from your program.
We're going to spend 4 weeks really diving into the fundamentals of relationship, of communication, priorities. Yeah, we'll talk about the healthy priorities in a relationship, taking care of yourself first, then the relationship, then the rest of the world, right? And being willing to do that makes a huge, huge difference. Theresa.
We're also going to talk about conflict because guess what, y'all? It happens. Even when I travel and I travel with other people, the first thing I say is I have certain things that I need to do my best, like if we're rooming together. What do you need? Oh my God, what if you set up disagreements like that? Hey, we're going to come up with a disagreement. It's going to happen. So let's have, like, how do you argue best? Or what do you do when you're upset? Like, what if you had that conversation even in the honeymoon stage? And you're both talking about what happens when we have conflict. We're going to talk about how to do that in a healthy way.
I am okay. So I'm an Enneagram 8. So if any of you know anything about the Enneagram 8, this is like such a turn on for me. The idea of talking to a partner, even early on, about how you're going to handle conflict. You're like, yes, let's do it. Well, I'm super excited. Are there any like final thoughts before we wrap up? I promise I'll put all the links in the show notes for the listeners. But is there anything, pearls of wisdom, you want to leave us with?
I think why we created this and titled it this, we had a conversation and said, what does the world need right now? And we thought about the conflict going on in our society, the political divide, the cultural divides that are out there, and what can we do to bring people together? And that's where the title comes from, the Love Solution. So, the overriding message of our work is to choose love over fear. And
I love
Choose
that.
love. Love is the answer. Doesn't matter what the question is. Love yourself, love others, love a situation.
Oh, beautiful. Well, Theresa and Rick, I just want to thank you so much for being on the show and sharing these wisdoms. We're planting the seeds and now we're just going to water it, add fertilizer, the soil, all the good things, and we're just going to watch all of this love bloom for us all. So thank you so much for being a part of it.